Rolling. Action. Cut. Rolling. Action.
Well, my knot slipped on the first one, and I really just can't have that. So can I start that again?
And what I'll do, action. Do me a favor.
Yes, sir.
Action. Do it one more time and just hook, when you hook it on.
Just hook it. Don't back up.
Wait for a second, yeah, before you do it. Don't back up.
Don't do two steps forward, one step back.
Put your hand in there so I can see it again. These things. And action. Give me some more reeling. You can reel it back out and back in. Okay, good.
That's every videographer's favorite shot, is the reel just zinging.
All right, but you can't be talking while I do it.
All right, sorry.
Here we go. Give me one more if you would. Yeah, I know. Yeah. Just hold it. Action. Cut.
All the way to the river.
Just like you're walking to it, but don't actually go there.
Okay.
Action. Cut.
Do you care about the...
Action. Cut. Action. Cut. You're doing better than me. I'm going to shoot a close
Get
up
my
anyway.
shoes on?
I'm going to shoot a close up anyway. Action.
Wait a second. Didn't you
Cut.
pull up the...
Action. Cut. Action. Cut. Action. Cut. Action. Cut. Action. don't think you shut the thing. Because your
My
cup
coffee
would have
cup.
stopped it, yes.
Glad that didn't tip over. Oh, if I put it over here.
Action. And walk away. Okay. Okay. Rolls.
Speed.
So, first question. What images or thoughts come to mind when you think of the Pigeon River or when people evoke the Pigeon River?
One image that a lot of people may have of the Pigeon River is really characterized by its nickname, the Dirty Bird. It's endured a lot of pollution over the years, but is doing better now.
That's good. Have clients or customers ever made comments about either the smell of the river, the quality of it, of you taking them over the years?
Clients have commented on the sulfury smell as we're driving through Canton. As far as the water quality goes, the river or the water clarity has a kind of a sweet tea kind of tint to it. It's not gin clear like many of our spring-fed rivers in this area are. So we do get questions from clients as far as why is the river this color, etc.
Okay. And leading to the next question, so I guess those are the distinct features that make the Pigeon River somewhat unique to other rivers, right?
Yes,
More or less.
it makes it different.
Mm-hmm.
You want me to make a comment about how people are interested in the water quality, and fly fishing is it's more or less an avenue into environmental quality. You know, because you get closer to fly fishing, all of a sudden environmental policies and quality become more important to you because it affects what you're interested in.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I mean, for the second question.
Okay.
Should have got some hand warmers for myself.
And so, as a fly fisherman guide, what are you looking for? What do you see when you go out on the river with people? Specifically, what do you like notice or trying to seek, I guess, with people when you're on the Pigeon River?
As a fly fishing guide, one of the things that we look for is good water quality. You're trying to find fish to give people as many opportunities as possible to catch fish. As skill levels vary, we want to give them as many opportunities as possible so that they actually can have a chance at catching a fish. So your water quality, your habitat, all of those things are factors. So you have some places that are more ideal for aquatic life than others. And there's a number of variables that affects that. Water levels, all of the chemistry makeup of the water, the pH has to be just right, etc. So water quality is huge. Usually when you find trout or cooler water species in a river, then you know you have cleaner water because they can only survive in these margins. For instance, stoneflies, mayflies, caddisflies, those are all indicator species. So when you find those bugs in water or in a river system, then you know your water quality is good. Black flies, for instance, if you only find black flies, then the water quality is not good. Black flies can survive in lots of polluted water, so you'll always find black flies. But so there's indicator species that will tell you, you know, what that water quality is without having, you know, a chemical or a water test done. Lower.
Cut.
I'm not clear on what you want me to repeat though.
Talking about like an indicator species, because you were talking about the black fly.
Uh-huh. Repeat that part
It just like
or elaborate more on it.
No, I think Ron has follow-up question, and we'll cover that.
defining
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
indicator species.
Okay.
Because we just missed it on the last one. So ignore it.
So following up with the last question, I guess, could you describe indicator species, and then what certain qualities or indicators do you see as a fish guide along the Pigeon River?
So an indicator species would be, for instance, mayflies, stoneflies, caddisflies. When you find those bugs in a river, then you know you have good water quality. Um, a trout is going to eat those bugs. They feed on them during all of their life cycles. So oftentimes you'll find trout, which you could also call an indicator species. People like to say that trout only live in beautiful places, which isn't totally true, but they do live in clean water. For instance, if you have a silty river where you have all the sand covering up the rocks in the bottom of the river, that smothers all of the bugs. That's where the mayflies, stoneflies, and caddisflies start their life cycle. So when you have sandy bottom rivers, then it smothers the bugs. So therefore, there's not as much food in the river in order to sustain a large fish population. The Pigeon River, let me back up and say that trout like water between, or I should say below 68 degrees. And they thrive in water between 45 and 55 or 45 and 60. A smallmouth bass likes water that's about 15 degrees warmer than that on average. So they really thrive in 75-degree water. So they're not going to eat caddisflies, mayflies, and stoneflies as often as a trout would, but they're going to eat crayfish and other small bait fish. And so those crayfish, hellgrammites, smaller bait fish like darters and sculpins, they're going to eat the mayflies, caddisflies, and stoneflies. And so it's a pyramid. It's a food chain. And so that's where the biodiversity comes into play, and therefore that's why indicator species are important when you're trying to locate a fish species that you're trying to target.
And so what do you see right here along the Pigeon River that would indicate for you the quality of fly fishing along the river and taking guided trips and stuff?
For the section of the Pigeon River that we're standing on here, we've got nice moving water. It's clear. You have shoals, runs, flats, so you have a number of different water types that a fish can seek shelter in. They will change their location based on their needs. So when you have multiple water types, then they can move around. For instance, in the summer months when it's very hot, they may feel lethargic, they might need more oxygen content, so they'll go to a shoaly area where there's more water tumbling over itself. Versus in the winter months when it gets cold, they want to go to the deepest part or the deepest hole in a river and seek shelter there, and they'll slow their metabolism down. So you want diversity in your water types rather than having, one type of water. It may hold fish in it, but there are certain times of the year where it's just not going to thrive, and it's not going to provide good opportunities to catch fish or for fish to thrive.
Got it. And so, in terms of fishing in the actual Pigeon River, what are some ways or qualities that fly fishing is a little bit different compared to other rivers? I know previously we had talked about the bait that was used. I know it's slightly different.
So how is this river different than the other rivers that we fish as far as tactics or
Tactics
anything different?
in relation to the quality of the water, yeah.
Okay.
I'll stand by. Sure. Whenever you're ready.
One of the things that we see as guides that's different on the Pigeon River than some of the other rivers in the area that we fish is just the water color. It has a tannic kind of quality from a high iron content. You'll see that in a lot of rivers that flow through an industrial park, etc. And so that has changed sometimes the color of the fly that we might use. Like we find that copper colors or oranges work really good on this river. So that's maybe one of the biggest contrasts as far as what might be different between this river and the other rivers.
And so, in regards to the closing of the Canton paper mill, which is very intertwined with the town of Canton, the river itself, since the closing in May, have you seen or noticed any particular differences in either the quality or the fish species of the Pigeon River since that is closed?
As a guide, we haven't really seen any differences in the water quality or the fish habitat or the fish density for that matter. It's been a short amount of time, and so while tests have been done, and I have spoken with some of our local river keepers, it's just still a little too early for it to tell. We all kind of anticipate that your diversity and density of fish species is going to increase. You're going to see a lot more smaller species of bait fish. Maybe your diversity in your darter family will increase. So it will come back. It's just going to take time.
And okay, so that leads to my next question with the closing of the paper mill. Generally, I guess bouncing off the last question, what do you see for the future of the Pigeon River and for the future of fly fishing in this general area as a result of the closing of the mill?
Since the closing of the paper mill, I would anticipate that the area will thrive. We're not going to get that constant sulfury smell in the air. I mean, some days, depending on which way the wind is blowing, you can really smell that a long way away. The river is certainly going to improve and create more fishing opportunities and recreation opportunities. I would imagine that the economy is going to thrive. With the paper mill shutting down, I would think that real estate would go up. I actually have a friend that just bought a house over here. As soon as the paper mill was sold, they bought a house over here because they anticipate that there's going to be growth that happens.
So
Is that good?
yeah, that's great. That's great.
Okay.
And I guess generally leading to the last question is beyond the river. So with the closing of the paper mill, you see opportunity for the town of Canton, despite obviously the loss of jobs and whatnot within the town. You see hope for cleaner, somewhat more sustainable future, and hopefully a magnet for more tourism for your business, right?
Yeah. Can you repeat the first part of the question just so I can
Sorry,
repeat
yeah,
it?
That was a... Okay.
I mean, that's a good question.
It's
Yeah.
a good question, but do you feel like you're the one to answer that?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, then,
Can you repeat the first part of it again, though?
yeah, just answer the first part.
Sure, I'll just ask a very short way of just saying what I said, which is, do you see the town of Canton becoming a magnet tourism for wildlife or fly fishing after the closing of the mill? And do you think this will positively affect the town of Canton despite the loss of jobs?
I think the closing of the paper mill will be a positive thing in the long run. I know that a lot of people have been concerned about the economy.
Stand by for audio. Whenever you're ready to ask again.
So, last question one more time. What do you see as the effect of the paper mill closing on the town of Canton in relation to, I guess, the economy and the river as a tourist magnet?
With the paper mill closing, I think that in the long run it will be a positive effect. With Western North Carolina being a huge tourist destination for all sorts of outdoor activities, I think it's just a matter of time before it will thrive. So, while there may be fewer jobs in the factory, that's going to create, hopefully, more small business that will thrive, outdoor recreation, outdoor tourism companies like my own. I think that there's a lot of room there for growth, and it seems like this constant challenge between economics and environment. There's the ebb and flow. What might be good for the environment isn't good economically, and vice versa. So I hope that we'll see positive impacts from the paper mill being shut down. I could comment on the guy that I met at the coffee shop this morning too. Like, he's a local, and he had some things to say about that, but it's really just my opinion, So I mean,
I think what you told us was great.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, cut. But
Cut.
what I'd like.
Camera rolls. Speed. Action.
found one cased caddis so far. And another cased caddis. There's quite a few cased caddis. But no mayflies and no stoneflies so far.
So what does that tell you about the fly fishing of the river?
Well, in this spot particularly, there's just not a ton of bugs on the bottoms of the rocks. So not as much food source. And I think that will improve. As the water quality improves, so will the aquatic habitat. And then the food chain can just flourish all the way through there.
Give me like right here. Speed. Stand by.
So this rock has quite a few cased caddis, but it doesn't have any stoneflies or mayflies. not going to splash as hard. Well, I can maybe get it to splash. That's about as much of a splash as it's going to make. I have a froze. Speeding.
Stand by.
There's somebody up there.
Yeah, I know.
They're on the phone, but they're
I know.
going away.
Cut.
We're getting wings now that we didn't have before. 1 second.
Okay. All right.
Speeding.
Cut. Good. Camera rolls.
Speed.
All right, so first and foremost, what is it that you do exactly for the NC Wildlife Commission?
I'm a non-game aquatic biologist for the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission.
Cool. So what does that?
One second, Edie. Actually, to say
Everything makes
first
noise,
and
yeah.
last name and his title.
Okay.
And however he wants to be identified.
Okay.
Just in one sentence.
Can you say your?
Wait a second. Wait till everybody's rolling again.
We're still rolling. Anytime.
Can you say your first and last name and what it is that you like? What your title is?
So my title is very confusing to the average person. So it's not I'll say is not actually my technical title. Okay. I'm Luke Etchison, and my name is Luke Etchison, and I am a river conservation biologist.
Awesome. So what was it that first drew you guys to the Pigeon River?
That's a good question. One of the
Second. Hang on one second.
Okay.
Are you breathing? Still rolling. We're good. We're good.
So what is it that drew you to the Pigeon River to research?
The Pigeon River is one of our priority rivers that we monitor and keep track of, and we've been trying to recover since over the last 20 years. There's a project that started in the early 2000s that was focused on bringing back all the species that used to be here 150 years ago, before the mill opened up.
So since the mill has closed, how has the Pigeon River changed? How has the species that are residing here changed? Kind of like what visually have you seen that's been different?
Yeah, so when we first started monitoring the Pigeon River after the mill closed, we actually collected data before the mill closed, about a month before the mill closed, and then a couple months after. And what we first noticed was just the density of fish that we were able to find. There were some sites that we only found 15 total fish, and we went back, we found hundreds, and with many more species. So immediately saw that there's just a lot more life around. And when we started looking at the individual species that we were getting, we started seeing that we found a lot of young, very young darters, which are just a sensitive group of fish that like cold flowing water. And we found a lot of them and a lot of juveniles, so meaning they probably had a good, successful reproduction this year.
So what does that entail in terms of having so many juvenile species? How is that good for the river? How is that showing you that the river is progressing?
Yeah, so it's a good, so when we did our surveys before the mill closed, basically everything we were finding, if we were finding anything, they were adults. We found very few darters in general. And when we went back and we were finding juveniles, it means that there's a good chance that they're going to be successful at reproducing downstream of the paper mill, which they didn't have in the past. We rarely found young individuals. Most of the time we found animals we think just washed downstream or came from the tributaries.
So you said that you do a lot of surveying for these species. What exactly does that entail, and why kind of essentially do you go out and do it?
Yeah, we have a standardized protocol to try and capture the abundance and diversity of species at a given site, and it helps us track over time trends in species diversity and abundance. So when we do this, we basically sample all available habitat and try and get a good representation of what species are at that site at that time. Oh, yes.
Another important piece of the story is the science behind the stream. This would be similar kind of to what we've discussed a little bit, but could you elaborate on how that has changed since the paper mill has closed?
What do you mean?
So in terms of
Sorry.
like the pH of the stream, or
Oh.
you know, kind of anything that would
Oh,
be
okay.
indicators of further biodiversity in the future.
Yeah, so the big things that we noticed immediately as far as water quality that the fish were probably keying in on were there were likely the big changes in temperature. Upstream of the paper mill and downstream is significant difference. At times it was 10 degrees difference. And fish and other things are pretty sensitive to what temperatures the stream is. And when you have a really warm summer or a drought, water temps can get really high downstream of the paper mill, and a lot of things get really stressed when that happens. And there's also a big change in the color of the water. The effluent from the paper mill was a real tannic, kind of dark color, and definitely likely had some impacts on how fish will see predators and experience what's going on in the stream, and in some cases even reproduction.
We also would like to give some of our viewers more information on like how things are changing within the community. So is there anything that the Wildlife Commission is doing to like help educate people or help kind of make it so that people know exactly what's going on and what they can do?
Primarily the big things we're doing to try and educate the public are just being transparent about what we're finding in our surveys, giving regular updates. We're going to continue to monitor the Pigeon River upstream and downstream of the paper mill into the future. We'll definitely sample every single year, and we're definitely planning on we're doing more to try and get information out that the river is improving and that it is safe to be in. And it's why we put a site for the Blue Ridge Snorkel Trail here, because a lot of folks have just written off the Pigeon River completely, and we want people to know it's safe and it's an awesome place to be.
What are the snorkel trails? Can you kind of explain why those are being put into place and what importance those have to people here?
Yeah, so we started the Blue Ridge Snorkel Trail as a way to reconnect people with our rivers in western North Carolina. Many of our rivers are clear most of the year unless there's been a really big rain event. A place like the Pigeon River, if it doesn't rain for a couple of days, it's probably going to be pretty clear. And the idea of the Snorkel Trail is to get people to experience all of western North Carolina, all the different watersheds, and basically give a location that's publicly accessible for people to go and stick their head underwater. Because if you don't see something, it's hard to care about that thing. And we're hoping the Snorkel Trail gives people an experience where they can see some species they would never see otherwise. You won't catch them, and you won't see them at most aquariums.
And then prior to kind of the Canton paper mill closing down, was there anything that you noticed different from upstream versus downstream? And can you kind of explain how that might have changed?
Yeah, so when we decided to do some pre-mill shutdown surveys, we wanted to make sure we had a site that we surveyed upstream of the paper mill and downstream so we could compare long-term, have it basically as a control for what we're seeing downstream. Big differences have always been there's been a significantly higher biodiversity, more fish species, more mussel species. There's mussels inside this park right now that we don't have downstream, and there's a very clear difference. And we're hoping that we'll get to hopefully document the recovery of all those species as they move downstream.
Is there anything else that you feel like viewers or just people here need to know?
Let's hold off on this question for this point.
Let's just go ahead and cut.
Speed.
And anytime.
Actually, I did have one other question.
Yeah.
Can you explain what species indicators there are, like keystone species, and how those are showing that the river has like progressed?
Yeah, so that group of species I talked about, the darters, they're all generally pretty sensitive species, so they won't be there in a place that's has like high pollution, and they definitely seem to be coming back already. There's one species called the tangerine darter that is really common up here that we didn't see very often at all downstream, and we actually got a juvenile this last summer when we were surveying. And there's a species called the olive darter, which is we don't see very often. And we collected 9 juveniles, and that's equal to the most we've ever found in a survey ever, like anywhere in western North Carolina. So it's a good indication things are heading the right direction. And there's also some other species that we haven't seen very often downstream of the paper mill, like the river chub. The river chubs are what's considered a keystone species, meaning that their presence enables multiple other species to be there. And so they build these things called, we call them chub mounds. They're basically these little rock pyramids that they will spawn on, and it's really perfect for a lot of other species. So you end up getting in the spring 5 or 6 other species on these chub mounds, and without this species present, none of the other species would be there. And we've seen multiple of those species downstream already, and we're hoping that we'll see a good year of reproduction in 2024.
And then is there anything else that you think is imperative for people to know or understand about changes that we're seeing in the Pigeon River, or, why the shutdown of the Canton paper mill was so imperative?
Yes, so in general, the Pigeon River is a special place, and Canton is a river town, and this will give it the maximum opportunity for seeing its full potential as a river town. And it's already showing that if you give the river a chance, it'll find its way back, and it seems like the river's responding well so far.
That's all the questions I had.
Cut. Rolls.
Speeding.
Cut. Action.
Yeah, so we got a couple central stone rollers.
You show it to the camera?
Yeah.
Can't see it from here. You can't see it.
Yeah, these are central stone rollers. They're algae eaters, so they basically scrape algae off of rocks, and that's how they got their name of being a stone roller, because it looks like they're rolling stones when they're trying to scrape algae. So they have like a little hard cartilage shelf on their lower jaw, and they actually just like scrape along. It's pretty cool, but they're really easy to ID. They're pretty common and a tolerant species, but there's not a whole lot out right now.
I was going to ask you to bring him over here.
Oh, I mean,
Can you get him over?
we'll,
Cut. Second.
didn't get a stone roller, but we got a few darters. These are like really small.
Wait till Bob set up so he can get the picture.
Come over. Well, look, I'm going to do it. Seeing everything, and I'll do a close-up after we get through.
Okay. Go.
Talk to somebody here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can show us the fish and tell us what it is.
Yeah, so this is a juvenile green.
Start again, my fault. Go ahead.
This is a juvenile greenfin darter. They're a darter. They're in the darter group, and there's a lot of different darter species around here. They're all really sensitive to pollution, and greenfin darters are one of the species that we've seen show up downstream after the mill closed.
Okay, just hold it. Make sure the sun's on it, please. Yeah, show it to me.
Hold your head steady.
Yeah, just hold it steady. Thank you. Man, I'm bossy today. Can I see a profile of the fish? There we go. There we go. All right.
And keep it right there. And I just have one
You wanna talk
question.
some more?
Yeah,
Hang
one
on.
question. Tell me when you're.
Anytime.
Tell me, what does the presence of that darter tell you?
This darter isn't present anywhere that has really high pollution rates. So basically, if we see this species, we know that the river's typically in a pretty good place, especially if you see juveniles, because that means there's reproduction. Because you can sometimes have adults be in an area, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're reproducing, and you need reproduction to keep it stable over time. So it's good to see multiple stages of life.
And tell us, what stage is that?
This is a juvenile, so it probably would have been born earlier this year. And what's really cool, when this fish gets older, if it's a male, they'll get bright dark green when they are close to reproducing. So they're really cool fish to see and snorkel with in this river. They only get 3 or 4 inches long, so. But that's why these are the species you wouldn't typically see if you fish a lot, or even see it, a local aquarium.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Got it.
Camera rolls. Action. And walk away. Let's do it again. Cut. Camera rolls.
Speed.
Action. Let's do one more. I'm sorry. I didn't know you were going to watch the rolls. Action. Camera rolls.
Speed.
And anytime.
So, how is what you do different from what the Department of Environmental Quality does?
Yeah, so the difference between what I do and what Department of Environmental Quality does is I focus
Let's do it one more time, so it's
Yeah.
Tourists, motorcycles.
could you count to 10 for me really quick?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7,
Okay.
8, 9.
I'm still rolling.
Still rolling as well. Okay, for this.
Yeah, good.
Hikers from hell. Where the hell is this person going?
Your call, Eric.
Let's try it.
Okay, go ahead.
So how is what you do different from what the Department of Environmental Quality does?
Yeah, so what I do is different from the Department of Environmental Quality or what they do. My job's different from the Department of Environmental Quality, what they, how do I say that? The difference is, the difference between what I do and what the Department of Environmental Quality does is I focus on conservation of specific species. Basically, I try to keep common species common and species that are of greatest conservation need. I try and find ways to enhance their populations through reintroductions or trying to help mitigate negative things that are happening to them.
Ask it again, or?
Well, yeah, I mean, can you, when you talk about what you do, can you contrast that with what DEQ does, which is more chemical analysis versus biological
Yeah.
analysis?
So the Department of Environmental Quality, they focus a lot on long-term monitoring, looking at trends, looking at how water quality parameters are changing and if they're within compliance. And what I focus on is individual species conservation. So our species of greatest conservation need, I'm trying to find ways to enhance their populations, either through mitigation measures or through reintroducing species in places that we think they should be. And then I also do a lot to try and focus on monitoring of all the species we have, just so we know when they're in need of help.
Great.
Cut. That was great.
Cut it. Audio speed.
Anytime.
All right. So I noticed your mayor sign up there, and it says Milltown's mayor, but the mill's no longer here. So how will Canton refocus its identity away from being a paper mill town?
Well, that's who we've been for 115 years. We've been Papertown, USA, and then the last decade known as Milltown. And I think that we still can be a mill town without the mill. I remember the very first interview I did in March, just hours after it was announced out of nowhere that Evergreen was closing and 1,100 jobs were vanishing. And I look back on it and I watched the video and I have tears in my eyes, and it dawned on me and I said, being a mill town is not so much about the machines and the building, but the people inside. The ones that were there in March and the ones that have been over there the course of 115 years. Those hard blue-collar traits that not just in North Carolina but across the United States is part of our shared history. Punching the clock, making the sacrifices, the whistles, producing something. I believe that for America to work, you've got to make things. And for 115 years, we made paper. And I think as we build a new Canton, this is not something we're going to move on and just talk about what is next. It's going to be tied to our past, the good and the bad. And I think that's what will allow us to continue to be a mill town, even without a mill. We will, embrace our history. We'll keep telling the stories, but we'll build a future that is respective of the ones that came before and the ones that will come after.
So you talked a little bit about how 1,100 people lost their jobs. How has Canton been dealing with the economic hardships that came with the closure?
Well, our people are just amazingly tough. There is a song by Balsam Range, a Grammy Award-winning bluegrass band from Canton. And one of the songs that became our theme during the floods of 21, where we lost 6 people, half the town was underwater. We lost our town hall, our police department, many of our businesses. It was a song by Balsam Range called Grit and Grace. From 0 hour till today, and I think it will carry us, is grit and grace. If there are 2 words, the grit and the grace of the people of Haywood County and Canton especially, to find a way, put one foot in front of the other. We have not been paralyzed by this. There has been, several just moments of just pure sadness, and just, but we found every time it happens, we find a way to pick ourselves back up. And I think a lot of people, even today, they look at Canton through the pandemic, through the floods, through this, and they're like, man, y'all have just had it. I don't want our lasting legacy to be one of pity. I want it to be one of hope, of finding that way. Even in North Carolina, nothing against Charlotte, but there are more Cantons than Charlotte. And these small towns that dot our map, from Murphy to Manteo, we're all going through something. I think each of us individual, each place in this state, in this world, we're all going through something. If we can be an example of a town and a people that through all the challenges we faced have found a way to move forward, we want to be a story of hope and recovery and resilience. And again, it's that grit and grace that has been here since 0 hour, and it will be here for as long as I'm mayor or part of this community.
Can you talk a little bit more about the floods? Do you know what caused them? It was through the river, right?
Yes, in 2021, in August of 2021, much like the closing of the paper mill, out of nowhere, there was a tropical storm Fred. At this point, really, it was a tropical depression that came through the Gulf, and it hit the southern mountains that border Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina. And I remember it was a very rainy day. There was some chances of some isolated flooding, and it was enough that day on the way back from court. I drove by my sister's house, who has her house on the river, who had just lost her husband 2 weeks beforehand. And I remember seeing the river, and it was up, and I made the standard phone calls to the town manager, the county manager. At that point, we were prepared, but we had no idea what was coming a few hours later. About 4 o'clock that afternoon, I started receiving phone calls and texts, especially up the river, the Crusoe area of Haywood County. It's not in the Canton city limits, but it's part of the Canton family. These families are part of our schools, our churches. It may not be the city limits, but it's part of the family. And that something was happening. And I remember going home and telling my wife and changing into my Carhartts and my muck boots, and I said, either this is going to be one to remember or we're going to dodge a bullet. And sadly, it was one to remember. So I went down to the riverbanks to one of our Feed and Seed, Riverview Feed and Seed. Great store, great family. And I forgot who showed it to me, but someone handed me an iPad. And it had the river gauges, and then there was this. And I remember asking, what is that blip? And that's what was happening in Crusoe. And really within the next 30 minutes, the river, I was watching the river, and it was, very quick, very heavy, but not to the flood stage yet. And almost something supernatural started happening where it just started rising and coming around, and we were just being overrun by this river. And what we would later learn is what the storm did up at the headwaters, even above Crusoe, down from Mount Pisgah. There was, it rained all day, there was a bunch of mini landslides, and it just sort of built up until it exploded. And I've talked to some people that swear they heard the sound, but there also was a major landslide. A whole mountain basically just slid down. And so all of that got focused and was building all day long. And so when it broke, this huge wall of water I refer to as a demonic flash flood, started just overtaking the whole community. I mean, there were places that were nowhere near the flood zone that were completely wiped out. I mean, stories of people being washed away and taking their belt buckle and tying it to a tree. We lost 6 lives, mostly at a campground right near the top of Crusoe. And, people running. I mean, at one point, I was going back and forth, and I have an alderman, Dr. Ralph Hamlet, who lives near the river. And I remember coming back from my sister's home, and I said, "Have you left yet?" She says, "Well, no, the river's not out." I said, "Ralph, you have to go. I won't use the language. This is PBS. I won't use the language I used." And he said, "It'll be okay." And by the time I got back to his house, I had to wade in the water with some others and get him and his daughters to safety. That's how quickly. So in an hour and a half, we went from dry land to being absolutely submerged. And half the town, we were isolated, was cut off. We lost our police department, our fire department, our town hall, our museum, our theater, several businesses, our football field, but most importantly, 6 lives. And I think we've recovered well. But I mean, looking back, the idea that a mayor of a town roughly 3,000 feet above sea level has to check tropical forecast like Canton was 300 feet above sea level speaks to the change. I think when you listen to the old timers, a lot of us point back to '04. My father was mayor in '04 when 2 hurricanes within 10 days came from the Gulf and hit Canton. And they said, well, this is a 100-year event. This is a 500-year event. Well, you can plan for that. I mean, things happen. We made it 17 years. And we have on the political side, this has been not just in the mill closing, but the floods, a huge bipartisan push. I could not be more proud through all, especially in 21, still in a pandemic. When so many people were in partisan boxes, we came together, and we're doing that again with the Evergreen closing. But, I mean, we've sort of gotten away from the politics of it, whether it be called climate change, global warming, etc. Things are happening. We are seeing it every day. The frequency of events, the power of these events. I don't want to get lost in the causes. I have my own personal beliefs. I'm a believer in climate change. But my job is to help out so it doesn't make happen. So even as we look to the future of the mill site, it was built in the flood. Canton was built in the flood. I've been very clear that as we build Canton's future, we can discuss a lot of things. But as mayor, if we do not take this moment to rebuild economically the mill site, but at the same time do flood mitigation, we are missing a huge opportunity, and we are putting lives and homes at risk. And if we can do both, and I think we can, then that will be a lasting legacy where we're rebuilding a community, but also building it for future events, because it's not a matter if we're going to flood again, it's a matter of when.
So, in terms of rebuilding the community, who's responsible for what happens with the plant now?
Well, I think it's a joint effort. I mean, every day I get, hey, what about this and what about that? It's private property. Evergreen Packaging owns that site. Roughly 180 acres. They own the landfill. They own a dam up at Lake Logan, another one of the headwaters of the Pigeon River. And, there's a lot of ideas. There's a lot of things that, I have ideas about. But until we're able to get site control or play a cooperative effort with Evergreen, whoever comes next, there's not much we can do. It's basically property rights. Now, I am confident that in time that we will play a role. And we should play a role. I mean, this is something that has dominated our economy, our history, our culture for 115 years. And whatever is next down there, we need to play a role in it. And so I think that we're well on our way, working with Evergreen and other potential folks to see what is next. But, the people of Haywood County have to have a seat at the table so we can determine our future. That is the very least that Evergreen can do. Evergreen at some point will be gone out of this community, but the rest of us will be here. And so we are playing a major role in determining our future, as we should.
Has Evergreen been cooperative, working with the town and the locals?
Well, I would say that relationship is evolving. It is different now than it was in March. as expected. There have been ups and downs. There have been disagreements. There has been understandings, and I think that's part of the process. One thing I'm very proud of our community, especially our elected officials, Democrats and Republicans, county, state, local, is, other than probably the first 48 hours, we have not been paralyzed by this. We have been here for our people. We have honored them. This is a death in the family. I've said that from day one, and we were able over months to, do a funeral and a coming to terms with this because it meant so much to so many people. I've told this story. Several events that we had, people would bring pictures of their grandparents and parents that passed years ago, not even related to anything at the mill, but to them it was connection. As long as those smokestacks had smoke coming out of them, as long as that whistle blew, in some regards their family members were still alive. They had that connection. And so with the closing of the mill, it was a closing of a chapter for so many. And we honored that. But at the same time, behind the scenes, from day one, we have been thinking about what is next, doing the things that we could economically, financially, to prepare and start having discussions because we do realize it's a huge opportunity. It's an economic superside. What's it going to be, how it's going to be is still part of the conversation. And so again, an evergreen, they have different goals and different understandings. They are a publicly traded company on Wall Street. I'm doing this interview on Main Street. Time and time again, there's different goals and objectives. But I am confident, I'm cautiously optimistic that progress is being made to start the next chapter of the story.
What kind of concerns do you have about contamination in the ground and in the water as a result of the mill?
Well, as you said in the beginning of the interview, when I ran for mayor in 2017, Milltown's mayor, I'm proud to be the mayor of Milltown. But it's also okay in looking back on our history, our shared history in this town and with the mill, especially in the environmental realm. There has been tremendous challenges and setbacks. And, I'm fully aware of, especially when I was growing up. I just turned 41 in October. I remember when I was a young child, the foam, the pollution that was on top of the river and in the trees and the constant odor and the discharge. And at that point, it was more than 1,100 jobs. And I think our story of our mill towns, like so many across the United States, especially for the greater part of the 20th century, there was not an attention to the environmental, fallout of these huge plants, whether it be textiles, paper, chemicals, whatever, steel plants. And absolutely it caused harm. And that's okay to say that. Even in general, it's okay, talk about your past and say the good and the bad. But now in the present, what can we do to do better in the future? And so, there are still problems being, looked at down there. I can't say enough about Secretary Beiser of DEQ and her team at DEQ, the Department of Environmental Quality for the state, basically our state's version of the EPA. They've done an amazing job, not just identifying the problems, but finding workable solutions. Again, talking about the politics of it, Governor Cooper and his executive team have been here since 0 hour. But on the flip side, Senator Tom Tillis in Washington has been great. And, and with the budget really allowed us, because one thing environmental is that the mill, since the 60s, our wastewater treatment plant is on the mill site. So that was wonderful. It kept our prices down. It was a great sort of relationship. But what do we do now? Luckily, the General Assembly just provided us in the budget $38 million. And so obviously that's Republican-controlled General Assembly, and they were great. And so there's things like this working through environmentally. But DEQ, as I like to say, they're the high sheriff down there. They're doing a good job. They're keeping us informed. They're keeping the public informed. Evergreen is responsive to them. Again, there's always going to be disagreements, but we have to talk about what can we do to fix it. Is because what's next, we can't talk about what's next until there's an environmental clean bill of health. And I'm also very appreciative. Attorney General Josh Stein has been very clear that Evergreen, rightfully so, will be held to their legal obligations. They're not going to leave this community without doing what they legally are obligated to do. I hope they do more based upon what they, their decisions have done to this community. And I think they realize that. And so that is ongoing. I do think at some point there will be the turning of the page. But, environmentally, they know what they need to do. We're going to keep the pressure on as we should and as we plan that future.
Howard, would you ask me, what do you think green is the only thing the opposite in terms of cleaning up water and kind of
Yeah.
As a lawyer, what do you think Evergreen is legally required to take care of in terms of contamination in the ground and in the water?
Well, I'm a proud UNC graduate of 2008 to law school, but I practice here in my small town. I'm a general practitioner, so I do a fair amount of criminal, domestic, wills, and trust. But what I do not do is environmental law. In some regards, it's above my pay grade. I'm amazed by some of my fellow attorneys that are in that realm, representing the state, representing companies, representing, quality of life, rivers. But, again, I scratched the old nose. Sorry about that. Again, it's above my pay grade in some regards. I know just enough to get me in trouble. But I'm, again, especially through DEQ, the Attorney General's office, Josh Stein and his people, they are trained in this. But again, I think it's sometimes you can step back from the law. As I tell a lot of my clients, it's a practical side and the legal side. And a lot of times they go hand in hand, and sometimes they do not. But obviously, if there's environmental issues down there, the causation is because of processes that were happening in the mill, not just at, before closing, but after. That falls on Evergreen. I mean, we have an obligation, especially in this state, but especially in the mountains. I mean, every day I get to wake up and understand how lucky I am to live where I live. Speaking of other attorneys, especially my friends in the cities, they have their skyscrapers, I have mine with the mountains. And the river, I've said from, the days following the closing, it dawned on me. The Pigeon River, which runs through Canton, through Haywood County, into Tennessee, it brought the first settlers here. My family was one of the founding families of Haywood County. I mean, they came here because of the river and the valleys. The river brought the paper mill, and it will be the river that delivers us into our future. Again, it connects our past. I see outdoor recreation, use of the river, increased wildlife is being a major part of what is next. And if that is going to determine our future, then in the present, Evergreen has to fix the issues that are there. DEQ is doing a great job identifying the issues, giving Evergreen opportunities to solve those. I think that process is working well, but that will continue until there's a clean bill of health. And again, is that founded in the laws of our state and country? Absolutely. But a lot of times I have found in law in a small town practice, look at the issues on a human level. If you do something that causes harm and you just make a mistake, then it's your responsibility to fix it. And it's Evergreen's responsibility to fix it with guidance from the state. That is the right thing to do. That is the legal thing to do. And I think it will be done.
Do you have any concerns about the health of the Canton people as a result of the waste put out from the mill?
Well, I mean, over 115 years, where a majority of the lifespan of this mill was in a time period where we did not have environmental laws as we do now. We did not have conversations. I mean, I don't think we appreciated what humans were doing to our environment. I remember being a young kid at North Canton Elementary, going home, I think tears in my eyes because I watched a video, probably on PBS, with the 6-packs, from the Coke packaging, what it was doing to marine life, and ducks. I remember even to this day, every time I see a 6-pack plastic binder, I make sure to cut it up. But again, that's not something that really took place in our society for many, many decades. I think we're a lot more in tune to what the effects humans have on the environment and how important all of that is, whether it be food, water, or just health. So there's no doubt over 115 years, things that were occurring at the paper mill had an effect. You know, obviously there's rumors of increase this and increase that because of it. But, you know, again, something way above my pay grade. But again, I operate from a very practical point. You know, the cleaner the environment is, the better we treat what God gave us, the better off that is for humans. To breathe fresh air, to have clean water. I don't need a science degree to understand the importance of that. And as we move forward in Canton, we're going to take that in consideration. We have to take that in consideration. You know, and I think in some regards, I don't think it's our, you know, obligation to, you know, pay for the sins of the past, but we can do better. We should always be asking what we can do better, whether it's environmentally, politically, personally. Even when we make mistakes, admit them, and then find a way to do better. I think that's so important on every aspect of our life, you know, whether you're a mayor or just someone out there. When you screw up, take responsibility and do better, and that's what we're doing here in Canton.
As a mayor, do you have any specific assistance or programs that you're working on for the people of Canton regarding health and environmental safety now?
Well, I mean, we have been blessed, and I take every opportunity when I talk to people to say thank you. From the floods to now, there are people that may be watching this show that they simply said a prayer for us at some point. You know, and I'll never be able to say thank you to everyone, but know the prayers and support have made a difference. We have been very financially blessed from government assistance to nonprofits in giving us resources across the board, whether it be workforce, training, economic, wastewater, Dogwood, the Dogwood Health Trust in Asheville has been amazing. Blue Cross Blue Shield, the UNC system, the General Assembly, the federal government, local nonprofits. But as it concerns environmental, I think one of the newest things announced is that the UNC system, I think the name will slip me. It's not the Innovation Fund. I cannot believe I'm forgetting it, but I am. Is working with DEQ, and they're going to start doing testing, not just on the mill site, but on the outskirts to help identify problems. We are absolutely, I think, not just in the present but future, really leaning in to involving the UNC system, Western Carolina, and NC State and UNC, really taking all the resources. We understand there are people out there that have an amazing amount of resources and intelligence and training in these fields, and we want them to be part of this. You know, we see this as an opportunity to really bring out the best of North Carolina as we go forward, and especially in the environmental realm. And so there's a lot of grants for help us to understand the environmental side, flood mitigation, planning. You know, as we plan, you know, what our future looks like down there. You know, we can talk about roads and buildings. Again, what are we doing for flood mitigation? What are we doing to prepare for environmental issues? I think that we are really embracing trying to bring as much different schools of thoughts into a solution. And definitely that involves environmental.
Valerie, do you want to wrap it up with one more question?
Yeah.
That was about all I had.
From the floor.
Answer to a question that you didn't ask.
Okay.
That makes sense to you?
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry, I'm picking out a question.
No, go ahead.
Do you know if the paper mill is a Superfund site?
It is not.
Okay.
And at the present time, I do not think that it will be.
Okay. If it's not a Superfund site, who's going to clean it up?
Well, I mean, I think that first off determines on what's next down there. At the present time, it's Evergreen's responsibility. And I think it will continue to be Evergreen's responsibility. You know, again, if someone else comes along, there can be agreements made. But if those agreements do not work back, it falls back to Evergreen. I mean, we realize this. I mean, it was, when I was growing up, the mill was Champion International. I think Champion was bought out by International Paper or sometime in the late 90s. Then the employees bought the mill, and it became Blue Ridge Paper. Blue Ridge Paper was then bought by Evergreen. And so even down there today, I know this because we have some recreation fields that have monitoring stations. International Paper, IP, that's their responsibility. So, I mean, in many ways, I see a future where Evergreen is not present in the town of Canton, but they will be. There's no doubt there will be monitoring stations, there will be responsibilities that Evergreen will have some say, but I do see a future of where others are, you know, again, following up on liability, doing what is necessary. And that's just that happens all the time. Someone comes in, buys it, it's their responsibility. But obviously we're not there yet. But as the present day, in November 2023, that is Evergreen Packaging's responsibility.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. First
Yep.
we get some room tone.
Room tone?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're almost done. Rolls.
Speak.
Okay. Hey, Ralph. So, could you state your name, your official title, and how long you've lived in Canton?
I'm Dr. Ralph Hamlet, and I am a Canton alderman. And I've lived in Canton since my birth, 1951.
And we spoke a bit on the phone about how residents feel about the mill closing. Could you speak just a bit more about residents' feelings? The closing was immediate and a surprise. So can you tell me more about how people are feeling right now?
The words I heard were mourning and a death in the family. It was something that I wouldn't expect from the mill, from the mill closing. But the people were devastated. Many wringing their hands, saying, "What are we going to do?" This mill is a part of the Canton ethos, as well as the surrounding area. So it was bigger than a mill. It was almost a sacred that you dare not say anything about. As a matter of fact, down below me on the street, there's a sign. And it says, "Have you prayed for the mill today?" And the mill sign, incidentally, was paid for by a member of the state legislature. And this is the feeling that many people have. It's given to us by God, and everything is sanctioned by Him.
Could we pause and stop the clock in the other?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, because I'm hearing it.
It's
cut.
louder now than
Yeah.
Okay.
Is it a rolls?
speak.
Anytime.
Can you talk to me about some of the environmental impacts residents experienced while the mill was open, like the smell, any noise pollution, air pollution, things you saw in the river?
Oh, well, growing up, living in close proximity to the mill, coal dust was falling constantly because the mill was coal-fired until relatively recently. And then it went to gas, which was funded by the state. But you had the pollutants from the coal. The water quality was awful as soon as it passed through the mill. I remember chunks of foam from the bleaching process floating on top of the river, and the river was just black. And so you had chunks of foam. And when I say chunks of foam, I'm talking massive sizes. And you would go into Clyde, and then it would, Clyde is the town next to ours, and you'd see it breaking up a little bit. And if you followed the road on into Tennessee, you still saw the foam. It was diluted, but it was still there. The river was not the same once it went through Canton. And this is one reason the people in Tennessee organized a dead river or a dead pigeon association, because this river, which was a part of their livelihood and their way of life, was changed after it went through the milling process. In terms of the smell, I didn't smell it. And the reason I didn't smell it, I was raised here. And it's funny, the people who were raised here could not smell it, but there was another corporation going into Asheville, the Inca Corporation. And it's been closed down for a number of years now. But there was an expression, Inca Stinka. And I heard that cheer used one day at a football game, which was recent. The name still sticks, because people would say that they could smell, and I'm sure they could, because I could smell Inca, but I couldn't smell Canton. But it was funny watching people who had never been to our town before holding their nose, because the stench was so bad. And for the people who could smell it, the expression was, that's the smell of money. People dared not talk about the smell. They dared not talk about the water pollutions. They dared not say anything that in any way disgraced the sacred, because that was the livelihood. And how dare you say anything about the meal? And it still resonates today. Have you prayed for the meal?
Excuse me. So would you say then that, was it a high priority for people while the mill was open, like wanting to see greater care taken for the environment?
It depends on the individual. I would argue the average mill worker, unfortunately, had no regard for it. And I would, for the quality of life, the quality of air, the pollutants. And I would suggest...
Sorry. I really need some water.
Got it.
Speak.
And so would you say that the seeing greater environmental concern was a high priority for people while the mill was open?
Absolutely not. Especially for the people who worked in the mill. You got to consider what the demographic of the worker happened to be. Many of the workers were older. Many of the workers did not go any further in school, unfortunately, no more than high school, if that. Their ambition, many of the individuals, was to work at Champion, later Blue Ridge, and then Evergreen. That was the goal, that was the dream, because their daddy had done it, their daddy's daddy. And you notice I say daddy because for the most part, women were invisible if they did work there. And it was considered a man's job. So to say anything about environmental concerns, pollutants, the smell, what happens downriver, was not a concern for the individual, because the meal was as sacred. And you dare not say anything against the sacred. It's almost a sacrilege. There's a sign that says, "Have you prayed for the meal lately?" And that was the attitude. and you dare not say anything. I worked at a radio station in my high school years, and it was foggy one morning, almost thick enough to cut it with a knife, and we saw many of those days. And I said something on the air about, here's the champion fog, because we knew that's what it was, or the meal contributed to fog, warming the atmosphere, on very, very cold days, and then it would just fall back. And I was told quite sharply I was never to say anything like that again. The meal was that important. So people, when they did speak out, if they ask a question about the meal, people would say, "You're talking about our livelihoods. What? You want people to lose their jobs?" So it was a blind eye.
And the mill is closed now, and so perhaps people. Do you think that people feel the same way? Or let me rephrase. Actually, what environmental concerns do people have now that the mill is closed and you can't necessarily say this is our livelihood?
Well, as I said, I'm on the board of aldermen, and we passed a moratorium, which gives us 1 year to assess the damage done by the mill. Because what's going on there has been a well-kept secret. We don't know the pollutants, the poisons that have been put in the ground there for the last almost 100 years. Well, it's been 100 years. And the moratorium gives the town a chance, a place at the table, to find out the damage that's been done and what it would take to clean it up. And it gives us a chance to make sure that the next industry coming in there hopefully will be a good environmental steward for not only Canton but the surrounding areas. So the moratorium does have an advantage. A place at the table gives us a chance to voice concerns of citizens. But many people, after the fact, no one said anything about the moratorium when we voted it through, but after the fact, are very suspicious of the moratorium. That one fellow said, "We're trying to keep industry out of Canton." And we're actually not. We just want to make sure that as we progress into this century, that people are held accountable.
And held accountable for what?
Held accountable for potential damage that could be done to the environment, potential damage that could be done to citizens living here, seeing black smoke belched into the atmosphere and then coming down and breathing them. Well, as an anecdote, 2 years ago, our cars were covered with lime, and you couldn't get it off. I'd say 2 years ago. It's probably a little bit, about a year and a half. And a lime gunk. And at first, Evergreen was questioned, what is this stuff falling on our cars? And I must say I was a victim myself. And at first, denial. Oh, we had nothing to do with this. This is not related to the meal whatsoever. And then the story changed. And they said, well, just take it to the car wash, and you can wash it off. And you know, many families around here, they get their income through fast food, through retail. Not the best salaries in the world. And they're more worried about feeding their families than they are about washing gunk off their car that came from a meal. But that surface, you can see gunk on a car. It's the gunk in your lungs, or little children playing. But in response to your question, unfortunately, and because this is such a sacred, and it's still recent that the mill has closed down, people are not willing to challenge it yet. Hopefully, that will change as we move further away from the event of the mill closure.
And can you say a little bit more about concerns the town has right now about the 200 acres itself and like what environmental damage might look like for there when people, whoever decides to come and do something with it?
We don't know. And this is one reason for the moratorium. People have been allowed to go into the mill since its closure. The mayor was one person who was allowed in, along with our town manager. They had to sign a non-disclosure agreement before they were allowed to go into the mill site. Because even though the mill's closed down, and even though they say they're not going to reopen it, that's off the table. There's an air of secrecy. And I'll be perfectly honest, if given the chance to tour the mill site and having to sign a non-disclosure agreement, I wouldn't take the tour. Because people need to know. And the mill's closed. So what harm does it do? And another company coming in, I mentioned a moment ago, good environmental stewards, because we would like, if a company comes in, they will stay. But they're staying on the condition that they are environmentally responsible. That it's not the smell of money. That lives are at stake. And not only our lives, but the people downstream.
Can you talk to me about if you know, do residents have an idea of what sort of industry they would like to see come into town? Are there conversations like that happening?
The answer is yes. Meaning that anything is better than nothing. I have heard Bitcoin. I've heard the possibilities of another paper mill, but that's, I think, more wish than reality. We've heard of a company coming in just to dismantle what's down there. Everything's up in the air. And it's, well, in Evergreen's court, except we did issue a moratorium, and it's been approved for zoning and well, zoning permits, which haven't been updated since 1968. What, 55 years? So it gives us an opportunity to hopefully make things right for the next person who comes in and make it right for the citizens.
As a resident of over 20 years, what do you think residents can do to have more of a stake in what is coming next and be perhaps better environmental stewards for Canton?
That's a very good question, because it's this mentality that is so embedded within Canton. And it takes a change of attitude. It's an attitudinal shift. Suddenly, that it's not merely about money. It's not that my family's worked at this place, but we're all responsible. Responsible. Who? How do you create this? Or construct a new attitude? And I say construct instead of create, because create, pop, it's there. Construct bit by bit, and that's a long process. And that's what a town board will do. Communicating to the public. What needs to be done for the future. And unfortunately, many people really don't want to hear that. Because when it comes to jobs, expediency is better than the wait.
And is there anything that I didn't ask you about environmental consequences from the mill that you feel is important for people to know?
Well, shortly after the mill announced it was closing, it was reported by a local newspaper who had been tipped off by someone on the mill site that the management there had straight piped pollutants into the river, which, of course, is EPA violation. But I think the attitude there was, who cares? We're closed. And to me, that's what's troubling. That there was damage done, and we wait to see the extent of that damage. But there is a chance that damage could continue to be done. Evergreen is responsible for waste sewage treatment for the town of Canton. That was part of the bargain when they bought it from Blue Ridge Paper. It was part of the bargain of Blue Ridge Paper when they bought it from Champion International. And Canton got a good deal. It treated our wastewater. And we didn't have to invest in that. Well, they're going to do that for 2 years. And the problem is, Evergreen, it's to their advantage to cut corners if they can. And the pollutants being dumped into the Pigeon after the closure suggests that. So I would think, well, from my perspective, I'm concerned. Because arguably, and people might take issue with me, I don't see Evergreen being a faithful player in all of this. That they closed a machine down last year. It's number 20 machine. And they said, well, it's going to be a short time. We're just going to shut it down temporarily and make some repairs. But a person who was connected to the mill for quite a long time said, once you close number 20 machine down, you're not going to get it started. Because the machine hadn't had updates to it. It was in a state of disrepair. By shutting it down, you doomed the machine. And then the last machine to go, number 19. Same thing there. And Evergreen knew. And they could have leveled with the people in Western North Carolina, because this is a Western North Carolina. This is a North Carolina. This is a multi-state enterprise, actually. They could have leveled, but they didn't. And now that I hear about non-disclosure agreements, I'm even more suspect. So I'm concerned. I think we need to have a watchful eye over what goes on down there.
Can you repeat that again? The dog was shaken there.
The sentence, we need a watchful eye.
What you said about I'm concerned?
I'm concerned about the authenticity of what Evergreen says. And I think we've got to always have a watchful eye. An eye that has been shaded by expressions of it's the smell of money, your questions damages the future of Canton. You dare not say anything against this sacred.
And who is investigating what's been going into the river? Is it the town of Canton? Is it the EPA?
I believe it's the EPA here, because this is an environmental regulation. This is, they can be fined for this. I think challenges have been issued for that. And I can't recall the exact date of this. It's shortly after the mill announced closure and did close.
I have one question. Let me this will be the last question. You asked me. Wait till I'm out of the way.
So have you suffered any health effects from growing up in Canton that are related to pollution from the mill?
I don't know. I know that sounds like a vague question. I mean, a vague answer. My daughters have rashes on their skin. Don't really know the cause of it. And just other things which doesn't seem right. But I think it's going to take years to know the impacts of the pollutants on the town of Canton. If we can stop for 1 second, sorry.
Cut.
I'm sorry. That's funny.
No talking, we're not here.
Sorry.
Sorry. Hang on a second. Close that drawer if you would. Put your filters in it. Close the drawer. I'm gonna start and stop you. Bear with me.
Okay.
Put it back. Put the filters back. Put the filters back on the drawer.
Gotcha.
Put that filter back, and I'm gonna have you take it out of the drawer. That's what I'm trying. Sorry, we're not clear on that. There you go.
Okay.
Ready? Stand by. Stand by. I'll say action.
Okay, good.
Sorry. Action. And stop. Action. Stop. Put the filter in one more time. And action. Stop. Okay. And action. Stop. Action. Do me a favor, I want you to turn the button off and turn it back on and stand by. Take your hand away. Sorry. Action. Just look at it like you're, make sure it's going to start before you leave. And just walk to the living room. Dog barking. Number 11. Okay. Good. Okay. Okay.
No idea. I'm not going to